We bring in a friend who we've known for years and years and years. He's an author, relationship therapist, Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson.
Some expert advice on how we can all talk to them. Joining us now is relationship expert Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson. She's the author of Courageous Conversations Connect. Good morning, R.G.
Doctor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Janelle. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And as we mentioned, a lot of people just dealing with anxiety during all of this. What are your suggestions?
Some of the things that we need to remember is that this is temporary. This is temporary inconvenience for long-term gain. And as long as we stay healthy, Janelle, then everything else is recoverable.
Talk to your children about what's happening right now. What are the best ways to do that?
There's some do's and don'ts, right? So you want to tell them that you're going to be here. We're going to be okay. Kids want to know that they're secure and they're safe. So predictability, structure, and consistency. You also want to let them know you have a plan. And even if you don't have a plan, tell them that you're working on one.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, this is Dr. RG, and this is the Courageous Conversations Connect space where we have our quarantine talks every single day, Monday through Thursday at 10 a.m. This is Monday, June 15th, 2020, and this is our 47th episode. We are in our 14th week of quarantine, and boy, do I have a surprise for you guys. As I said, we're going to have my good friend, my sister friend, Mel Robbins here, the one and only life coach, inspirational coach. She is an inspiration to me. We built a great friendship over the last year or so, and I was going on her show. And we're going to have what I would consider to be a courageous conversation today. And so tune in, tag a friend. Share this, go on over to the YouTube page and hit subscribe, click subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get all of our notifications. I see Treasure's on, I see Nicole is on, Mama Stokes, China's on. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the show. And let me tell you what the topic is going to be. So all week, we're going to be talking about racial healing, right? That's our topic the entire week. But today, with Mel, we're going to just chat, right, for the most part, but we're also going to be talking about how to talk about these two viruses that have collided, COVID-19 and systemic racism, but specifically what's going on with the Black Lives Matter protests, and also how to talk to white people. How do we have that courageous conversation? And what is happening in the families and the friendships and the spaces where white people are, where we have to connect as Black people? How do we have those conversations in a way that is healing, that is sustainable, and that we continue to maintain? Because the truth is we are all in this together. So I am just tickled pink. If you all watch the platform, Mel Robbins gave me her platform, her social media platform. So we're going to talk about that too, the Share the Mic Now movement and campaign that I think is not just a moment, it's a movement. So I cannot wait for my sister friend to come on. We're going to take a quick break from our commercial. Remember, think about who you're breathing for, because Mel's going to hop on and she's going to do the breathing exercise with us. So stay with us. All right, and this is Dr. RG again. This is the Courageous Conversations Connect space. Welcome to the show. This is our community give back. Morgan and I, we thought about this 14 weeks ago. What could we do to give back to the community? I was seeing clients literally all day, been extremely busy, and we thought this is the way for people who may not ever come to therapy, but they may need to still process. They may need to still talk. So we came up with Courageous Conversations Connect space and these quarantine talks. And as I said, and Deborah's on, Charlotte's on, thank you for joining the show. As I said a little bit earlier, we have a surprise for you. We have my good friend, my sister friend, I call her, Mel Robbins, joining the show, and we're going to have a courageous conversation about what it's like to talk to. What it's like to talk to white people, right? Black people talking to white people. Imagine that, about some of this historical pain and systemic racism, what's going on with the protests, as well as what's happening in the lives of us during these two pandemics, the collision between COVID-19 as well as these riots and these protests due to systemic racism. So welcome, 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 my sister friend Mel.
It's so nice to see you. And I have to say, I'm so bummed I can't like reach out and give you a hug. Last time I saw you, we were physically together.
I know. Well, virtual hug, you're in my heart.
Oh.
And huh?
Hi, Morgan.
Oh, Morgan said hi.
Mel, how you doing? Good to
Hi,
see you.
how are you?
Good to see you. How's the family?
Everybody, thankfully, is good. We're
Good.
all healthy,
Good.
and we, after 10 weeks in quarantine with our 3 kids, we're all still talking. So honestly, it's been a gift. It's been a very empowering 10 weeks of family time. A lot of deep conversations, not only about the resilience that's required to face changes that happen based on COVID-19, but more importantly, the incredible movement that we're seeing for social justice and how we all need to be doing our part, and the up and down of emotions that people are feeling. And so it's just been a really interesting moment in time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How are you guys?
Yeah, we're doing fine.
But Morgan and I are still talking too. Although I do banish myself to my room, usually. Sometimes when I'm getting a little too out of hand.
Oh, is that me? Do you need me to get on or is that because he's on with us?
Yeah.
They're picking up each other's mics. I'm like, what am I doing?
No, we're in the same room. So listen, what we do, Mel, is we do a breathing exercise. So I'm hoping that you will help us start that process, because many people are feeling so anxious and so overwhelmed. And I know you talked about your anxiety when you were in the very beginning, I think, of the quarantine. You were feeling really anxious, and you had your first panic attack that you had in a long time. So I want you to help us to breathe. Everyone says who they're breathing with and for. And so for the last couple of weeks, I've been breathing for the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and for Ahmaud Arbery, and now for the family of Rayshard Brooks, as well as the essential workers. Who might you be breathing for today?
I am breathing for everybody who's protesting.
All the protesters out there, they need it, and they're on the front lines right now. We've got the essential workers out there still fighting COVID-19, and then we've got our protesters, and we're in this fight together. But there's so many different ways to protest, and that's one of the more difficult ways to be out there on the front line. So thank you for that. Guys, let us know who you're breathing for or with when we go into our exercise. Mama Scout says she's breathing for herself, struggling to catch peace. She says, well, let me tell you, peace is hard, struggling to sort of protect our peace, if you will, with all of the imagery and all the pain and all the injury that's going on. It's really, really difficult. So we get in our positions. We put either our middle finger to our thumb or our hands over our laps like this, or to the sides. We do a little shimmy to kind of relax ourselves. And we are going to breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth. We do it 5 times, and we've been holding it for 8 seconds in honor of George Floyd, who, had a knee on his neck for more than 8 minutes. And we're going to get into talking about the trauma that we all experienced, as well as his family during this time that we're in. Okay. So at the sound of my voice, when I count to 3, we're going to breathe in through our nose, breathe oxygen in, breathe carbon dioxide out, but also breathe hope and love and peace and serenity in, and worry and pain and anxiety and fear out. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. and out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Last time, crew, make it count. Breathe in. And out. Yeah, that felt good, didn't it? Felt good. I felt like all that oxygen coming in. Sometimes you don't realize, Mel, how shallow our breaths really are when we're anxious and riddled with fear and frustration and pain and worry and all of that. Then we start breathing really shallow. And one of the things we learned about what was going on with COVID-19 is that the virus was attacking our lungs. And so people couldn't breathe, and then they were developing pneumonia. And then when we think about just what's going on in the world, it can literally catch your breath in a way that allows, it feels like you just can't breathe. So I want to thank you publicly, one, for your friendship and for you embracing myself and Morgan when we first got to meet you on your show. I, of course, knew about you, but we hadn't met yet. And I knew that you were doing some great work for humanity and making a difference. And then once I got to meet you, I just kind of fell in love with you. I just thought, like, this is just such an amazing woman who has committed her life to making a difference. And so just thank you for being you. And thank you for having this conversation with me. I wanted to start off with just talking about the Share the Mic moment. Like, tell me a little bit about how you experienced that Share the Mic Now moment, the campaign where you turned over your platform, your social media platforms to me, a woman of color, a Black woman, to share and amplify my voice on your platform. How did you experience that? Why did you choose me? Can you share?
Yeah. Do I need to do something with my mic so that it's not reverberating, or do you need me to put like headphones in? Is it okay?
I hear you fine. Is it reverberating for you?
Is that Morgan telling us something? I just want to make sure that the broadcast is clear. It sounds good?
It sounds good.
So, I'm embarrassed to say that I did not find out about the Share the Mic movement until I saw all these women posting about it that had organized it. And I saw it and immediately felt like, oh man, I'm so disappointed I wasn't actually a part of this. And as I kept swiping past all the people who were part of the initial wave, I saw the last page where they invited everybody who wanted to join in to join in. And I'm like, I'm doing this right now. And so you were the first person that popped to mind, honestly. And the reason why is because having worked with you through my talk show to make a immediate and meaningful impact with people both in our studio audience and the overwhelming amount of feedback that we got about what a powerhouse you are and how much I love working with you and how much I've learned from you, I immediately was like, I got to get Dr. RG. I wonder if she's available. Do you think she could do this? Like, this would be, I would love to put her out there. And so we reached out to you, and my team came back to me and said, well, what would you like Dr. RG to talk about? And knowing you and knowing your experience, your wisdom, how much I've learned for you, I'm like, what the hell are you asking me for? This is RG's platform now. She can talk about whatever the heck she wants to talk about, because we all need to take a seat and open up our ears and hear what Dr. RG has to say. And so I was just thrilled, because I knew that you would have something memorable and impactful to say. And I think as your friend and as somebody who is working hard to be anti-racist, and knowing that that is a lifelong commitment of educating yourself and staying in a mode of listening and staying in a mode of understanding and also taking action wherever you can, I have an opportunity to help other white men and women to understand what it means to be anti-racist, to understand the mistakes that white people make a lot of times unknowingly, that feel like a microaggression or feel like you are saying something that you didn't mean to say. And so I just felt like I got to get the loudest, most powerful, wisest voice on this platform ASAP. And it's just the beginning. I agree with you. This is not a one and done situation. And one of the things that I've found to be so awesome about this moment in time is I am being introduced to so many more Black voices, both in the mental health and personal development and in the anti-racist space, but also in all different verticals. And so it's exciting. And I also don't want to be naive in saying that just because this feels different and this feels like a moment in time where we could make positive change in this country on an issue as enormous and as painful as the systematic racism that has been born out of white supremacy and the legacy of slavery, I still feel that something different is happening in this moment. And so however it is that I can use my voice, my platform, my experience, and my friendships with amazing women like you and men like Morgan, I'm gonna do it. Like we gotta keep going until we make serious change in this country.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And we appreciate it. We appreciate you just being in this space with us. We are in this fight together. As a matter of fact, I've been looking at like the signs of the protest, and some that jump out at me, and I want to ask you what your thoughts about it. One sign that jumped out on me was silence is violence. And another sign that jumped out was this is everyone's fight. So we're in a fight, and it's all of our fight. It's not just Black people's fight or white people's fight. It's all of our fight. And then my pastor this Sunday, Morgan and I met at our church. He said that America will not survive or thrive if there are only a few nice rooms in a burning building or in a burning house. And I thought that was like really, really powerful with regards to just the idea that Black Lives Matter. And then I want to kind of wrap that with and see what your thoughts are about this, that white people, some white people, not all white people, but some white people seem to be so enraged at the idea of the hashtag, let's say, Black Lives Matter. And there's a retort oftentimes. I've seen it in social media places that they say then, well, all lives matter. And my retort is to that is that, well, if all lives really mattered, then there would never have been a need for a hashtag Black Lives Matter. So what's your thought about those combination of thoughts?
Well, all lives matter first, which is a very common retort that you're seeing. And I think that what it shows is just a lack of critical thinking, because nobody's saying only Black Lives Matter. What we're saying is based on the systematic racism, based on the violence against Black men, women, and children, based on the statistics and facts that are irrefutable about the sentences that Black men and women receive in the front of the same judges for the exact same crimes that are astronomically higher. I mean, look, I know you know this about me, but your audience probably doesn't. I began my career not in the media business. I was a criminal defense attorney for Legal Aid in New York City. I saw the bias firsthand in the criminal justice system. And so when you look at education, when you look at medical access, when you look at corporate representation, when you look at the way that Black men and women are treated in the criminal justice system, when you look at police brutality, when you look at economics, when you look at redlining, when you look at voter access, in every single possible way, this country has set up systems that discriminate against Black men and women and children. And this is what we need to change in this country. And so all lives would matter if we treated all lives equally. And so the reason why we need a movement called Black Lives Matter is because, as outrageous as it is to even have to say that Black Lives Matter, it should just be the way that it is in this country, that all lives matter. But that's not the case. And we know it's not the case based on the facts, based on the police brutality, based on what we are seeing with access to education, to medicine. This is such an enormous social change issue that has been a long time in coming. And so that is my retort to somebody that says all lives matter. And, it's a lazy opinion. And it's an opinion that's based in fear. And it's an opinion that means that somebody hasn't even begun the anti-racism work that we need to not only be doing as individuals, but we need to bake into the curriculum in our schools.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so I want to tell you a story about, it happened maybe before COVID. Maybe there was, and I told Morgan this, he'll remember, I was coming home from work one night and I saw a young woman who was kind of wobbly, and she was near the Philadelphia University campus, which is not far from where we live. And I was concerned. So I pulled over and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I'm just coming from a friend's house." And it was clear that she was probably inebriated. And she was kind of stumbling out into the middle of traffic. And so I followed her and I was like, "You sure you're okay?" Now, of course, unfortunately, in this world that we live in, you've got to be careful about inviting strangers into your car. But I was, in my mind, I was like, this is somebody's kid. This is somebody's young adult, and she's about to get hit. So I saw an officer, a police officer. And so I followed the police officer and I said to him, "Listen, there's a young lady back there and clearly she's inebriated. I'm very concerned about her." And he said, "Let me guess. She's probably inebriated, young, white girl." I didn't say what her race was. And I said, "Yeah, she's white and she looks inebriated and she's in distress. She's in the middle of the street." And he said, "Okay, I'm going to turn around and see about her. This is the story of my Friday night." And he was a Black officer. Mm-hmm. And I trusted that he was going to take care of her and get her to her destination, because she said that she kind of lived in an area called Roxborough, which is not that far in the car. But if you're inebriated and wobbling around in the street, 20 blocks is pretty far. And I thought about that juxtaposed to Rayshard Brooks a couple of nights ago, who was sleeping in the drive-through of a Wendy's, which, by the way, actually has happened to me before when I was really, really tired and I went to a drive-through and I'm sitting there for a moment and I'm just kind of nodding off. And 5 or 10 minutes later, he's talking to the cops and now he's dead. And so this happens over and over. What the difference is now we have video and everything's being taped. But I think about the hundreds. And by the way, Mel, the numbers are going up with people who are dying from COVID-19 because we're going to have a second wave and people are out there not social distancing. But it seems to me that there's more interest in the death rates of that virus than the death rates of the virus called systemic racism, hatred, and social inequities, and structural and institutionalized racism. So can you speak to that and how, by the way, that you make sense out of that for even people that are white that you're engaging with or talking to?
Yeah, and I think you're gonna really people. I think being an expert in human behavior and in personal development, we all hate to look in the mirror and see our own ugliness. And there is a reckoning that you have to have with yourself when you start to look at the facts around systematic racism and the violence against Black men and women. That if you're white and you really look at that, there's no way to look at those numbers and not feel somehow responsible, not feel shitty about it, not feel like This should have been something that was addressed hundreds of years ago. Not be ashamed of the history of violence against Black men and women and the history of slavery. And I think we have never come to terms with it as a country. And it is easier as a human being, and this goes for every human being in the world, it is easier to ignore the problems you don't want to face. It is easier to deny that they don't exist. It is easier to throw your hands up. And so I think from a subconscious level, the reason why it is easier for people to talk about COVID is because you don't have to do any deep personal work in order to face the history in this country. And you also don't have to do any personal work when you're talking about COVID, other than figuring out how you're going to protect yourself, versus everybody has work to do when it comes to being anti-racist. Everybody has conversations they need to have with their children. You know, I'll tell you a personal story. So I was at Legal Aid, and I was a public defender in Manhattan, doing criminal defense work for the city. And I thought, by seeing the difference in the lives of my clients growing up with poverty, with violence in their neighborhoods, with school systems where you had to walk through a metal detector, that I really saw firsthand how your environment changes what you think is possible for yourself. So many of my young men that I represented just expected to go and do a tour through Rikers Island at some point, because that's what they saw, versus, you know, the neighborhood I grew up in, where everybody just sort of expected they go to community college or off to college because that's what you saw. And so it began this awakening for me, if you will, in terms of understanding the greater forces that are at work in terms of the development of a human being and their potential. And I also started to think about when our son was diagnosed with dyslexia in the 4th grade. And my God, the school tested him, they came up with nothing. Thankfully, after my major financial crisis where I almost lost it all, and so I had enough money to hire somebody outside the school system and test this kid, because they kept saying, he doesn't have an issue. The kid is a problem. It's a behavior issue. And when I finally realized our son can't freaking read because he has severe dyslexia, and I learned more about dyslexia, I started to see, Dr. RG, and you know this, that when kids are in a school system and their learning differences are not being addressed, they start to act out. And if you look at our prison population, the vast majority of people in prison have a learning difference. And you start to wonder, geez, Louise, like if these kids had not been invisible in schools that were underfunded, and they actually had the resources and the services to help guide them, maybe, just maybe, because I could see my own son coming off the rails, but that's not the moment I'm talking about. So I also, before I hosted a daytime talk show, I was a paid commentator for CNN. What does that mean? That means that I was one of the 5 lawyers at the time that CNN had on staff as a legal commentator. I was a legal commentator when Trayvon Martin was murdered. I was a legal commentator when Michael Brown was murdered, when Freddie Gray, Eric Garner. I almost got fired for CNN because 5 years ago, when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening for Eric Garner, I was one of 3 women who put our hands up on air on national television to align with the protesters.
And then they said it was political, right?
Oh, yeah. And so I thought that I was doing the work. It wasn't until I had a moment with my friend Joey Jackson, and I think this is the moment that every single white person on the planet needs. Because change only happens when it starts to be personal. Thank God everybody's videotaping this stuff, because it puts it right in your face and you can't deny it. But the moment that blew my mind open, because it hit me at such a personal level, there's the intellectual issue that you process and think about. But for you to really get this, you got to get it in your freaking heart. And I think one of the reasons why that horrific video where we watched George Floyd be murdered in front of our eyes is it ripped open something inside of everybody's heart. If you have a pulse, I would hope that you were horrified that you could not even watch it. That's what I'm talking. You got to have something personal break open.
And it took your breath away.
So I'm sitting at the set on CNN, and my very good friend, Joey Jackson, who's one of the other awesome attorneys on the team.
Yeah, I love him. Mm-hmm.
I love Joey Jackson. And so we're sitting there, and we have kids the same age, and his son had just gotten into UNC, I think it was UNC, a fantastic college. And I said to him, "Oh my God, Joey, that's so fantastic. Whoa, yay you. You know, we're still got our fingers crossed. We hope our daughter gets accepted somewhere. UNC, wow, what an incredible school." I said, "Are you so excited?" And he paused and he said, "Not really. You know, I'm really nervous about, you know, having my Black son go down south, having grown up in New York City, where I'm not going to be there." And it was the first moment, I'm embarrassed to say, where I thought, holy shit, Chris and I never have to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
That is what privilege means.
Mm-hmm.
At the deepest level, I don't ever have to think about that. The conversations that you have to have with your kids about I don't have
The talk.
You
You don't have to have the talk.
No. And it was the first time that it hit me in my soul, just how profoundly fucked up this is, and how this has to change, and how many times you find yourself as a Black person in an all-white space. And then Joey and I started talking, and he was sharing the times that, you know, he's left CNN and walked into a grocery store in New York City and been followed around. And I'm like, and so, yes, of course I knew this happened, because 20 years ago when I was a legal aid lawyer, I knew this was happening to my clients and fighting for it. But it's not until you start to realize and absorb the constant toxic stress that racism and bias and discrimination and violence puts on you if you are a Black man or woman or child in this country, and how that has got to change. And it is not on you to change it. It's on us. It's on white people to join the fight and to educate ourselves and to do the work to not only become anti-racist, but be and continue to be anti-racist, and to have these conversations. Because to me, police reform, yes. Criminal justice reform, yes. But we have got to reform just about every aspect of this.
Absolutely. And that is no small feat, which is why we have to stay in the fight. Just like they said, COVID, this is for the long haul. It's a marathon, not a sprint. This is a marathon, and we need all hands on deck. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about white fragility and white allergies and why we need people like you as well to have the conversation with some of your colleagues in the workspace, where Black people, men and women like me, can't breathe. So we're not necessarily dying physically out in the streets, but we are definitely dying emotionally and psychologically in the suites. So we'll come right back. Thank you so much. All right, we are back with Courageous Conversations Connect Space in our quarantine talks with my sister friend, Mel Robbins. And I'm just excited. I mean, I wanted to give you like a really big physical hug, but all we got is a virtual hug, but I hope you feel my energy. And so for everyone that is on this space, please make sure that you share, tag a friend, let them know that we're having this courageous conversation. If you go over to YouTube, hit the thumbs up. That helps with algorithms, and we will. If you share it, then other people will hear this. This is a conversation that we need to be having. We cannot be afraid anymore to have conversations with our white friends, with our white colleagues, with our white community, because we are the human race. We're in it together, but we are not equal in this yet to be United States. And that, as Mel Robbins said, has to stop. And I also want to read a few things that some of our crew, we call it Connecting Relationships for Epic Wins, are saying. Helen says, good morning. This is what we endure in our daily lives. When will it end? Thank you for the conversation. And Jen, is that right, Moore? Jen says, what an amazing and peaceful walk yesterday afternoon in the Staten Island community, and told thousands in the crowd to vote and fill out the 2020 census that she made the newspaper. Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Thank you for reminding us about voting as well, because that's also a part of this fight. So, Mel.
It's a huge part, Dr. Argy. I mean, I think that we tend to focus on the national election, and I'll be very clear, we have got to vote this administration out. But it actually is, I think, almost more important that you are voting in your local elections. You're voting for the DA, for the sheriff, for the local administrators, that you are really involved in your community, because it's not just a top-down policy. This has got to be happening first in your heart, then conversations in your home, then conversations in your work home, then conversations in your community. And so, we cannot get complacent when it comes to any election, period.
Yeah. When we think about, and I was canvassing 4 years ago in my community, and people were disheartened. They had a feeling of despair. I heard a lot of hopelessness, and I heard people saying, I'm not voting at all because this administration hasn't done anything for Black people, and so therefore I'm not voting. And I said, do you understand that decision is a decision, right? That not voting will then X you out of the equation. It will impact our community for a whole. And I had the conversation with them about their children. I said, do you have children? And if you don't do it for you, can you do it for your kids?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm worried about is I don't think we're going to have a problem with people showing up at the polls in November. I'm concerned about suppression and the number of people that are going to be showing up, and making sure that you are able to vote.
Yeah, because the voter suppression here in Philadelphia was real. I mean, we had several new machines that were not functioning properly. They were not trained properly. People had to wait for a really, really long time. People didn't have the correct information about the voting in ballots. So, the early mail-in ballots. So it's a problem, and we got to kind of stay in the fight on that level as well.
Well, if we win the national election, hopefully that means that we can finally make Election Day a national holiday so that people can actually take the day off and vote.
How about that? Yeah, how about that? Yeah. So tell me, what about white fragility and white allergies? That's Morgan. White fragility and white allergies. Dr. DeAngelis, who wrote White Fragility, she was at a conference, a Soulworks conference that I attended last year, and I had already gotten her book with regards to that, but I had experienced that, and I will tell you that any Black person that grows up in the academy will experience this. And another story that I told last week was a professor of mine, Dr. Marlene Watson. She taught the Black experience, and she had us do a fishbowl exercise where all the white people just had to identify themselves as white, or whatever your race was, go to each side. And the simple exercise was to have the white people to talk about their white privilege. And the only white male in the class was so incensed that he stormed out of the classroom after saying that he didn't pay all this money at Drexel University in order for him to be attacked by a Black professor who asked him to talk about his white privilege. He then went on to say that he worked at schools in North Philadelphia, and he too had pulled up himself up by his bootstraps. And then he dropped out of the program because he said that this wasn't the program for him. So this to me is white fragility, when you can't even fathom having the conversation about white privilege as if it does not exist. Do you experience that with people that you're talking to?
Well, 1,000%. I mean, I think that we talked about this a little bit earlier, that there's an unwillingness to admit that you have benefited from a system that has discriminated against and been violent against Black men and women and children for centuries. And
401 years to be exact.
Yeah. And so I just think that there's so much. First of all, white people love to make it about themselves. Secondly, admitting that you didn't just get here on your own hard work, that you started ahead in the race, if you define it as a race, that you have gotten a hand up over and over and over again in ways that a lot of people don't even realize. See, if you don't do the work to understand what it means to be anti-racist, a lot of white people don't understand that there is documented research that shows that if you look at resumes blind, and if your name sounds ethnic, the percentage likelihood that you will not be called in for an interview is this much higher. Mm-hmm. I have spoken with so many Black entrepreneurs that talk about how they've gone to networking meetings, and they're all dressed up in the suit, and they walk up to a group of white entrepreneurs, and the conversation is a sentence or two. There are no questions asked. And to just test it, they then send a white colleague in, somebody that works for them, completely different response. And so one of the things that, in my work, I work in habits I work in patterns of behavior and thought. And what I also know about bias that a lot of white people don't understand is racism, bias, and prejudice is a pattern that's encoded right here.
That's right.
It is subconscious. It is unconscious. Most people are not overt racists. The overt racists are, in some ways, that's the easier issue to deal with because it's so grotesque and it's out on the surface. The harder issue to deal with is the fact that every white person is a racist. And the reason why is because you have grown up inside a system, whether it's a system that redlined neighborhoods, and so you're not in an integrated neighborhood, or a system that funded schools based on property taxes, which means you go to a public school and you believe that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and everything's even Steven when it's not. Or it's a system where you tend to gravitate towards the people at your college that are from similar backgrounds or look like you. Or it's you are inside a system that has been designed to suppress and oppress Black people and to keep white folks in power. And so you can't help but have certain beliefs that might even be unconscious to you that you're going to have to work hard to get rid of and replace. And until you start to come to reckon with the fact that this isn't something we're making up, this is a system that's in place that discriminates against people, and that there are very well-intentioned people out there, white people, that don't mean to do something discriminatory, but because of the microaggressions, because of the conditioning, because of these habits, you got some fucking work to do to break this bias apart. You got to, like, on every manager out there, look at your teams. Are they diverse? We know based on the research that diverse teams are more innovative and more profitable. Why aren't they? When you look at who you assign tasks to, when you look at who you mentor, when you look at who you promote, when you look at who you bring to a networking meeting, who is it? And these decisions are being made by unconscious patterns in your mind. And if you're going to change anything, whether it's a belief system or it's a behavior, you're going to have to understand that there's something that you're doing that you may not even realize that you're doing, and you're going to have to disrupt that behavior, and you're going to have to get super intentional. There's a reason why affirmative action was important. It's because of overt and unconscious discrimination. It's because of privilege. It's because if you don't have counter systems to the systems that's constantly pushing somebody down, how the hell are people going to actually have opportunity? And
Right.
so, you know, I think about the major work that needs to get done, and this is where I think you can move the needle. The major work that needs to get done is, especially in schools and in work settings, where are there behaviors from leadership and inside of teams and inside of promoting and inside of how you go about your day-to-day job, where you are discriminating against people and you may not even realize it, where you are choosing to spend your time and give a pass to the people that seem more similar to you instead of investing in time and building relationships with the folks that aren't. And so I think about it literally that everybody has this pattern. And it's sort of like, you know, COVID-19, 80% of us are going to walk around with it and have no symptoms. I think 80% of humanity walks around with racist patterns that they're unaware of. And I remember sitting at an event for a big motivational conference. And there was an amazing speaker sitting across from me. And she and I had shared the platform a couple times, and it was like a speaker dinner the night before. And these are like some of the top freaking people in personal development. And two people were sitting there to my right, and they were talking about television shows. And then this woman and I were talking, and we go to turn to talk to these two white people to our right. And I can't even remember what the hell the show is. And I said, "What show are you talking about?" And they literally turned and looked at the woman that was sitting across from me who was black and goes, "Oh, well, it's such and such, but it's not a black show, so you probably wouldn't know it." And I turned and I said, "Excuse me? What the fuck does that mean?"
I love it.
Now, see, that is what you need to do.
Call them out.
You need to call it out. You don't have to drop the F-bomb. But I was so angry because I could see her face drop.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at her and I said, "I'm really sorry that just happened." And of course, these two had no idea what to say.
We're like, what happened?
Said, "You have no idea how often that kind of thing happens."
Oh yeah, but we do. We have an idea because we feel it. We feel it in the depths of our soul. We feel it. But Morgan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I have a question, Mel. I know that you can't speak for every white person in America, but one of the questions that kind of frustrates me a little bit to try to understand better is, for all those white folks that have voted for Trump, I'm trying to understand, and you may have had the conversations with them and your family or friends or whatever. What is that they feel that they have to protect? It's like they feel like they're afraid, or what is it that makes them so entrenched? No matter what he does, they have the blinders on. They just won't see it. And in those conversations that you may have, because they're going to have different conversations with you and be truthful and honest. What is the fear? If you can kind of shed some light.
Well, first of all, as you know, I can't speak for anybody but myself. And I kind of think about the Trump phenomenon this way. I think that there were a lot of decent folks who just saw Hillary Clinton as more business as usual. She's a career politician. They bought into the rhetoric of, this person's an outsider. He's going to come in and disrupt things. I want something different than politics as usual. And, one of the things that I came to realize, and I'm speaking from not an intellectual point of view, but that I think most people are decent. And I think most people have a kind heart. I really do. And I think that one of the things that was very eye-opening working at CNN is realizing that the average person is not watching the news every day. The average person is not following the news cycle. The average person is not picking up on the nuances up and down of every twist and turn in the news. The average person is busy living their life, trying to put food on the table, trying to get through the stress of their day, taking care of aging parents, and they pick up one soundbite and they hold on to it, and that's it. And that doesn't diminish the fact that's not to say that people aren't smart or that they're not critical thinkers. It's just that I was really blown away in my experience at CNN to see that the amount that if you're in the news and you're into the issues, man, are you in it? But most people aren't. Most people think thematically. And so I think that it came down to, I just want something different. People ignored all the warning signs. We see this colossal disaster, and I could just go off right now about how incensed I am, but I'm not going to, because I think it's much better to try to figure out how do we change this situation. But when it comes to people that still defend the choice, I think what happens, and this is human nature, there are two things that happen that are at work here. One is, if you make a decision and that decision turns out to be something you regret, most people don't admit that they made a mistake. Most people defend their decision. And so I think psychologically what you're seeing is as the criticism ramps up against the administration, whether it's because of the response of COVID or the response to the protests or any single thing that has been happening every single day, you see the baseline of human personality come out, which is, if you're attacking my person, you're attacking me. And people emotionally cannot separate from a decision I made and now it's a mistake, and being able to admit that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong. Maybe, just maybe, this turned out to be a terrible idea. Maybe, just maybe, because I've been more floored by the Republicans that continue to sit silently.
Silence is violence.
And support this silence is violence than I have by even the actions, because you could have predicted that this was going to happen based on the way the man's always been. That's number one. So I think it's defensiveness and an inability to admit that you're wrong. And number two, there's a really interesting amount of research about the psychology of human beings and the fact that since the history of time, we have organized ourselves into groups. And in the very beginning, like if you think about developmentally as a human being, we're the only species that can't survive without somebody else taking care of us. Every other species basically comes out of the womb and you are somewhat self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Right? And so we as human beings are required to bond with other human beings, because if we didn't, we would die. If somebody didn't take care of us, if somebody didn't feed us, if somebody didn't protect us for those first, 5 years of our lives, we would die. And so we are hardwired to bond in groups. We are also, based in the history of time, we tend to group up together to share the load of living, whether it's hunting in groups or caring for a village in groups. And while we don't necessarily live like that anymore. Because of that, there's a ton of psychology about the other. So if you look at something as benign as sports teams rivals, boy, we're all in for our high school, and that rival town over there, all those people in that other town must be jerks, must be this. Oh, the Jets fans versus the Patriots fans, or the Eagles fans versus the, like, this is human nature. And the easiest way for us to immediately other someone else is based on the color of their skin, the language that they speak, the religion that they believe or not. And so I think you're seeing both the defensiveness that nobody can admit that, boy, this was a big fucking mistake to vote for this person. And the other piece being, that's one of those biases that we have, that it's implanted in here. I'm with my team, you're with your team. Your team's bad, my team's good. And so that's another foundational developmental thing about human beings that we've got to change. And I don't know that you can change that.
Yeah, I do have one other follow-up question. Again, you can't speak for everybody, it's white. But in terms of for white men, why are they so afraid? It seems like they really are struggling with this change in society. And it just seems like they're so entrenched against the change. And one of the common questions and themes within Black America, again, it's not all Black America, but, you know, are they afraid of the reality of becoming a minority? You know, like they say 20 by 2035, you know. So I'm just curious. Again, these might be conversations that you may be privileged to that we're not. So I'm just trying to ask you if you can share any light on that, that would be great.
It's a great question, Morgan. And, you know, I think that, you know, again, I can only speak for myself, and I don't get it. And here's why. I think that there are two kinds of mindsets in the world. There's the scarcity mindset that there's only so much success, wealth, and opportunity to go around. And if you become successful, somehow that's going to take away from what's available to me. And if I had to guess, what drives that fear is this fear that somehow if somebody else rises up, if somebody else is given the opportunities that you were given, if somebody else is able to achieve what you've achieved because we've leveled the playing field, that somehow that means you won't have it either. And I don't have that mindset. You see, I think the more successful people become, the more success there is to go around. The more you lift other people up, the more opportunity gets created. And, you know, Deborah, I can see Deborah saying it's because they fear having to live without privilege. I think that that's a good point, but I think most people don't even understand privilege. I think most people don't even understand what we're talking about when we say white parents don't have to have the conversation that Black parents and brown parents have to have with their kids about the police. White parents don't have to worry about their kid wearing a hoodie. White parents don't have to worry about, you know, we're up here in Vermont right now, and I'm like really sad because a couple that I really like, the woman grew up here, and she is with, you know, a Black guy that grew up in LA, and they come up all the time. And she said he just isn't comfortable because it's not a very diverse area given everything that's going on. And it made me, you know, that's another example of never even occurred to me to think about, oh, am I going to go to a city or a state and there's not a lot of white people there? I mean, it just isn't even something that enters my mind. And so I think you're giving a lot of people the benefit when you say they're scared of not living with privilege. I don't think we have such a long way to go before white people even understand what you're saying when you say privilege, because, you know, I really love, there's this amazing video clip of Warren Buffett where they ask him something about like his success. And he said, literally, the womb I was born to. That if I had been born and from a Black mom in the time period where I was born, I would not have the success in the business that I have, not because I wouldn't have been capable, but because of the systematic crap that's in your way that you have to constantly deal with. It wouldn't have allowed him to create that kind of success. And so seeing people that are so widely respected say something unexpected like that, we need more and more and more of that. And, you know, the other final thing I would say to Morgan is being an author and an expert in human behavior and change and empowering people and personal development. I think change of any kind is terrifying to people. And so I think that you've got just a casserole of psychological things getting triggered, from ignorance to fear of change. And then I'm going to throw in one piece. There are so many people, and this is not an excuse, everybody. So please do not, I'm not making an excuse for people. I'm just sharing so much fear about saying the wrong thing. And so what I want to say to any white person that's listening is that you have to risk saying the wrong thing. You cannot stay silent right now. It is not your Black friends and colleagues' job to educate you. There's something called Google. There are a million books you can read. There's so many, every podcast right now is scrambling to book every anti-racism expert. There is so much content out for you. There's free courses you can take. You have to educate yourself. But I remember when the protests really started to ramp up, all three of my kids were like, well, what do I say? Do I put the black box up? Do I not put the black box up? Should I take a photo of myself at the rally, or should I not take a photo? If I take a photo, is that putting me at the center? And I said, look, you know how this is what I said to my kids. You know how stressed you feel about this right now? And they're like, yeah. And you're kind of nervous about how you feel. I said, you're nervous about talking about racism. Imagine, guys, what it's like to fucking deal with it every day. You have got to put up something.
Yes.
Be willing, just put up, like, I don't know what to say, because clearly I don't even, like, I'm embarrassed. I don't know what to say. I'm never going to understand, but I can try to start to understand. I like, just go, say exactly where you're at, but show that you're doing something. Of course, you should be putting up the stuff that you're doing and celebrating the protesting that you're doing. Of course, you should put up something about the books that you're reading. Of course, you should share repost the posts of the Black students from your colleges that are speaking out as a way to use your platform to support them. And no, it doesn't make it weird if you don't know them. Do it anyway. Like, this is the moment to show up and listen. But sitting back and saying, I don't know what to say, that's not acceptable. And that's why it's important that you parents, white parents, lead by example, that you have these conversations in your home, that you recognize that we are in the middle of the greatest civil rights movement of our generation. And I'm speaking for 50-year-olds and under. Mm-hmm. And we're not in a moment in time where history is going to be able to be rewritten. We are going to look ahead a year from now and be like, well, what did you do? Mm-hmm. Did you sit your ass on that couch, or did you get out there and protest? Did you put a sign in your yard to make sure that everybody that drove by knew that you are with this movement? Are you speaking out at work? Are you asking questions at work about what anti-racism education and policies are we going to put forward? When you go to a networking meeting, are you bringing along a Black colleague as your plus one? Like, this is the moment to start taking action. Are you going to make mistakes? Of course. Have I said shit on this that I'm sure was the wrong thing to say? Probably. I don't care. I'm willing to make a mistake because I'm here to learn. I'm here to listen. I did a lot of talking today, but I have so much more to learn. And I'm going to continue to use my platform and be incredibly mindful about how I'm showing up and who I'm showing up with and how I'm making sure that the conversations that I'm having are as inclusive and as visible as they possibly can be.
Yeah, Morgan looks like he's frozen, but thank you. One of the things, and we're going to begin to wrap up, but Mel, number one, as I said in the beginning of the show, I appreciate your friendship. When this started kind of kicking up, you reached out to me and you said, I'm just concerned about you and Morgan, and I want you to know that I appreciate you and that I want to amplify your voice and I want to allow my platform to just be shut down so that yours can be elevated. That meant an enormous amount to me because that doesn't normally happen. That is not the norm. That is not the status quo. And so not only do I appreciate your friendship and your authenticity and your ability to have these courageous conversations and even talking to your children about what it's like for them to be anxious in this moment versus juxtapose what it's like for other Black and brown kids to be anxious for a lifetime about just walking out of their door. And so these conversations have to continue and they have to be in the hearts and minds of our children as well. Last thing I would say is that it pains me and injures me to see that every parent is not doing what you're doing, right? So there's the George Floyd challenge that's going around, and you see images of white kids that are putting their knee on the necks of other white kids and saying, I can't breathe. That stokes the continual systemic racism and hatred and violence that we've dealt with for over 401 years. And I know that it's difficult for young people to raise their voices because it's difficult for adults to raise their voices, but we need them. We need them now more than ever to call it out and call it for what it is in a way. And they won't do it if they don't have the support of their parents, quite frankly, that say it's okay.
Because the kids probably do only imagine the garbage they're hearing in their homes. And so they need their peers who they care way more about at that age to be the ones speaking up and calling out that's just not acceptable. It's disgusting. And, that kind of imagery continues to traumatize the Black community. And what I want to say to you, Dr. Argy, is that I'm embarrassed that it took something this horrific to have not only the world galvanized, but even for me to be more committed than ever to raise up the voices of Black men and women experts. I have been, I have certainly always paid attention to making sure that the audience that I serve is very inclusive, but I have not done as good of a job on my social platforms. My television show, yes, but on my social platforms of turning it over, of raising up Black voices, and you're going to continue to see me do that. And I want to thank you for making yourself available, for creating that incredible video that has been viewed on Instagram alone 50,000 times. So I haven't even looked on Facebook in terms of this morning to see how many tens of thousands of times. I'm sure in the matter of a week or two, it'll be a couple million people have seen it. And so thank you for the time. Thank you for having a very honest and raw conversation with me this morning. And I just really appreciate your friendship.
I appreciate you too. And thank you. This will not be the last, of course. And I'm glad I'm going to sort of invite you to continue to keep us in your prayers. And we will continue to keep your family in our prayers. I know that you're visiting your family in Vermont, your mother-in-law. And I think now more than ever before, we need to lift each other up. And so we appreciate you. Thank you so much. We'll be talking soon.
You got it.
Love you.
Love you too.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, guys. Thank you so much. You've just heard from a courageous conversation with my good friend, Mel Robbins. And this was a good one. This is a good one. So please share. Make sure you tag someone, that you share this video. Let other people know that this was a courageous conversation that we had about how to talk with white people about systemic racism, and also what's going on in the world related to the collision between COVID-19 and the racial unrest. All week, we're talking about racial healing. And so we want you to continue to tune in. Tomorrow, we're talking about having the courageous conversation in the workplace. And then we're also having Pastor Waller, Alan E. Waller of Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, my church home, Morgan's church home, to come on Wednesday. And he's going to be talking about what the role of the church has to say about what's going on in the world. So stay with us, guys. This has been a great conversation, and we love you. There's nothing you can do about it. Have a beautiful day on purpose. From my heart to yours.